Good morning, everyone. Friday night we're going to sit down at the seder, and of course the focal point of the seder table is the seder plate. And everything on the seder plate is related to the holiday of Pesach. We have the maror for the bitter times the Jews experience. We have the shenkon to remember the Paschal offering. We have the charoses to remember the cement. We have the karpas to remember to inspire the kids to ask questions by dipping the karpas in the salt water. But then on every seder plate there's an egg, a hard-boiled egg. And the question is, what's the connection between a hard-boiled egg and the seder plate and the holiday of Pesach? And so since the Pesach is associated with the number 4, I'll give you 4 answers why we have the egg on the plate. The first answer is that, interestingly, our rabbis tell us that the same day that the first day of the first day of Pesach occurs, every year that's the day that Tisha B'Av occurs. Now this year it's Friday night and Shabbos, so Tisha B'Av will be pushed off to Sunday because we don't fast on Sunday. But if you want to know on the calendar when is Tisha B'Av, whatever day is the first day of Pesach, that's Tisha B'Av. So the hard-boiled egg is always a symbol of mourning in Judaism. The mourner eats hard-boiled eggs because it's round, it represents the cycle of life. So we have an egg on the table to remember Tisha B'Av. But that in itself is a question. Why do we have to remember Tisha B'Av at the Seder? Seder is a happy night. Why do we have to remind ourselves that Tisha B'Av is coming in 5 months from now? And the answer is because it's reminding us that just like the suffering in Egypt led to the great redemption, the suffering in this exile, which is what Tisha B'Av commemorates, will ultimately lead to a greater redemption. As it says, just like the days of Timei Tzeis Chameres and Tzrayim, the same miracles witnessed when you left Egypt, you'll experience the same miracles when you leave this exile. So that's the first reason to remind us that there'll be an ultimate redemption from the exiles that Tisha B'Av commemorates. Second reason given is because an egg represents birth and death, because an egg has no mouth. Just like when a person is born, they can't speak, a newly born baby. And also when a person passes away, egg has no mouth. So the egg represents birth, and the second reason why we have the egg on the table is to remind ourselves that this is the birth of our nation, the birth of the Jewish people. Third reason given, interestingly, is that when an egg is hatched, when an egg drops out of the hen, it's released from its confinement. The egg is no longer confined inside the hen. But that's not the completion of the process. Now, the chick has to be hatched. In other words, the birth of the egg is it's the release from confinement. It represents freedom. But the freedom is not complete till the potential is realized and the egg and the chicken is hatched. The chick is hatched. So too, we should realize that this redemption of Egypt, while it's a freedom from the constraints of the prison and the suffering and the enslavement in Egypt, it's only step 1 in the process. Now we have to give birth to our own potential like the egg gives birth to the chick. And that's what the Torah on Mount Sinai is, allowing us to release our inner potential like the egg releases the chick. We all have our inner potential that the Torah helps us actualize and realize. And finally, the fourth reason why we have the egg on the table is because everything that you cook gets softer and softer. There's one thing that the longer you boil it in hot water, the harder it gets, and that's an egg. And that's why the egg represents the Jewish people. The more the nations of the world persecute us and torment us and impose suffering on us, we don't get weaker and softer. We don't fall apart like something that you cook that starts to disintegrate with the more hot water it's boiled in. We get tougher, stronger, and harder. And that's an amazing story of the Jewish people. Thousands of years of suffering, and we get stronger and stronger each time. And that's what the egg on the table reminds us. It's a true story told by Rabbi Scheiner Halberstam, the previous Klosenberger Rebbe, a blessed memory. He was a Holocaust survivor. Brutally, his family was murdered by the Nazis. So the Nazis would often round up the rabbis and the rebbes and the leaders of the Jewish community to humiliate them in front of their followers, to teach them a lesson that we're in control. And so they took Rabbi Halberstam, a Hasidic Rebbe with a long white beard and payas, and they started to beat him in the middle of the square. And all the Hasidim and the Jews of the town, Klosenberg, were watching with horror. And they knocked him to the ground. They started beating him, the Nazi SS officers, Yimach Shimon, with their clubs. And the Rebbe's laying there on the floor. And the Nazi officer says, "Rabbi, do you still think you're the chosen people?" And all the Jews are standing around. The Rebbe looks up and he says, "Yes." And they beat him harder and harder. And they said, you still think you're the chosen people? And he says, yes. And they beat him even harder. And then one Nazi officer takes his boot and he kicks the Rebbe in the mouth. And blood starts gushing from his mouth. And as he's laying there in blood coming out of his mouth, beaten and bruised, the Nazi officer says, mockingly, you still think you're the chosen people? And the Rebbe's laying there on the floor, beaten and bruised, bleeding. He looks up at this Nazi officer and he said, yes, as long as we're not the ones killing, murdering, beating innocent men, women, and children, we could still say we're the chosen ones. And that's been the position of the Jew for thousands of years. As long as we are following what God tells us to do, no matter what happens to us, we know we're the chosen ones. And we've become stronger and stronger from all of this. And therefore the hard-boiled egg on the seder table reminds us of the strength and the resolve of the Jewish people.